That's okay?
Okay, yeah, we're just gonna do it. How is that?
Excellent. This is Mark Needleman. He is the nephew of the famous Elmer Lippin, and we are delighted to have him come back to the synagogue to talk about his uncle and about his own memories of Adams Street. He had just commented before we turned on the camera that this place seems much smaller than he remembers.
Yes, yes. I suppose that's true of anything when you remember it as a child. The last time I was in the synagogue was when was for Elmer's funeral.
Which was in 1986, 87?
That sounds right. I'm not sure the exact year myself.
Okay.
And of course the funeral was here. The family was small, and I think most of his contemporaries were either too infirmed or could not get here or did not come here, but the place was kind of full as I recall. We went from here drove past his house, which was, I guess, the tradition then, and then off we went to Everett, where he's buried. But that was the last time I was here. It was wintertime, and I remember hearing the heat hissing. That's one of those sounds that comes out of my childhood, as being here in the wintertime and hearing the radiator. I don't see radiators anymore. Maybe that has changed.
They're these open
vents.
grates.
Okay. But I remember it being overheated. I remember it being
Really?
very warm in here. I think it was the age of the burner maybe, or the age of the thermostat. It was probably either on or off. And it was hard to regulate the temperature itself. And I remember in the summertime it being very warm. Obviously there was no air conditioning in those days. That's one of the sounds and feelings that I remember as a child coming here. Bits and pieces. Elmer was my uncle by marriage. His wife and my mother were sisters. They had no children. And his wife was a very nurturing kind of person. And not having children meant that she had to find another avenue for this nurturing. And I think Elmer became that. Nothing was too good for him as far as she was concerned. I think that for a greater or lesser degree, she lived for him, which I guess was not uncommon. When he passed away, she fell apart. She literally didn't leave the house for a year.
Oh my goodness.
And it was a matter of being coaxed. At some point, her brother, my uncle, was single and moved into the house to help. But in the interim, this has nothing to do with Elmer, but in the interim, he called me and said, he was living in Springfield at the time, and he said, you have to take over. You and your brother, I have an older brother, who also lived in the area, have to take over and keep an eye on her. And for about a year, as I recall, she really, I think for several months, she didn't leave her bedroom.
Oh dear.
And she was that completely bereft, is the only word I can use. Finally, she was coaxed out. One of the things that seemed to coax her out when she finally started to rejoin the living, as it were children. My son was born in 1984, so he was probably a year or two old when she finally started to re-evolve. She was always, at that point, though, much of a recluse. She came to family functions, but the only way that she obviously didn't drive, so we would come to her, and oftentimes I would take two of my children and bring them for a visit, and they kind of liked that. And my brother and sister-in-law did the same thing with several of their children. So we were able to at least bring her back. But back to Elmer, he was, because he had somebody who was very nurturing, he had a bit of an ego, because she fostered that, which was fine. It really was. But I remember the shul was very important to him. I mean, very important, doesn't even come close to really stating that fact. He dedicated most of his time. When we were very young, I remember that he owned property in the area. The family owned property in the area, and he was sort of the caretaker. But he was also, again, as I recall, sort of a jack of all trades. He was a plumber, he was an electrician, licensed in nothing. But if it broke, he could fix it, around the house especially. And I think that's how we kept the synagogue going, kept the shul open. But as I was remarking earlier, I remember of on a Sunday, he would come to Framingham and literally kidnap us and come here. Because one time there was touch-up painting that had to be done, and he had to stand on a ladder, and he was probably a little bit older then and was at least wise enough not to do it all alone. So he would have us come and hold the ladder. I guess if we were here, if he fell off it, then someone could call for an ambulance. But he was, I remember coming here when we were younger. And then when we got to be older, occasionally he would come get us. He was not Shomer Shabbos. He would come to Framingham early on a Saturday morning and bring us here because they were counting heads at that point on Saturday mornings. So my brother and I will be on bar mitzvah age. You count. And off we went. And then we came here. So the services, we were raised in a conservative synagogue, and this was, in those days, really Orthodox, old Ashkenazic Hebrew. And it seemed like a very foreign place to be. But it was very comforting. I remember feeling very enveloped, I think. I think also because a lot of the other men that were here, I don't remember ever seeing women here. Right. But the other men were grandfatherly types, and in we came. And it was, we were kind of the yeshiva bachas here in those days. But it was very welcoming. It was very comforting, I remember. It kind of, as we grow older and as teenagers do, we didn't come here very often as we got older. I remember coming here a couple of times when I was out of college and was in Newton or had come to see them, and if I dropped in on my aunt, my uncle could have been here. So I would find my way over here in those days, and we'd have a little visit. One of the things I remembered when I came in, this is the first place that I actually saw a Torah.
Really?
I couldn't tell you how old, but we were not temple goers as growing up. And I came here with Elmer one time for whatever reason other than we may have just been with him. And we came here and there was this very hushed feeling. The building was closed, there was nobody here. And he showed us around and he told us all about each of the different pieces, how can I put it? The different items that were here. It doesn't look much different than it did then, other than it's brighter and sunnier and fresher looking. But, and then he took us up to the Aron Kodesh and he said, you know what's in here? So I think I probably didn't and probably voiced that opinion. He opened up the ark and he took out a Torah. But the reverence that he held for that was just, I remember to this day, that it was just this, reverence is the best word I can give it. Devotion is not really the right sentiment. He didn't open it up, didn't put it down, although as I recall, he may have put it down on the Amud. But it was a very different feeling that I have now. There's a great deal of respect I have, obviously, for Torahs, but being involved with the synagogue now, I once, our rabbi, once I asked about, there was some children in the school at our temple, and they wanted to see one of the Torahs. So I said, okay, and I opened up the ark, and the rabbi happened to be strolling in. And I said, is it okay if I take it out? And the rabbi looked at me and he says, it's a book. Absolutely. People study from the Torah, you know, it's not only a Shabbos thing. So we took it out and I unrolled it and so forth, but that's when I remembered that whole incident of this reverence and awe, that's the word. that he had for this whole system. So I'm not sure what that instilled in me over the years. It was more than 50 years ago. It was probably closer to 60 years ago that incident happened. But I remember the synagogue really being what I thought was enormous. I think it was the height of the ceilings, and I was a little kid, and little kids think everything else is so much bigger. But there was that reverence that he had for it, and had for the show.
But he himself was not religious. He wasn't, would you say he was not observant?
On some levels he was, and on other levels he wasn't. I know that my aunt kept kosher for a while, as did her whole family, because that's the way they were raised. And when she passed away, there were an awful lot of dishes. There had to have been 2 sets. But he was, I think he was spiritual more than observant. He was knowledgeable. I remember him asking us to, when we were approaching bar mitzvahs, both my brother and myself, to hear our haftarah. He wanted to hear how we did it. And he would make corrections. Now, I don't know, as a call, I don't recall whether or not they were the correct corrections or not. As I said, Elmer had a bit of an ego, and I think that he wanted to be able to correct us and feel that, he had input to that. He was, of course, at our bar mitzvahs and every other life cycle event until he passed away. Yeah, as I said, I think spiritual is the best way to put it. I don't think that he would have approved of a lot of stuff that's going on these days. I don't know. Intermarriage now is a wink and a shrug. I don't think that that's anything that he would have thought highly of. I also found it, over the years, he was closer to us by his own admission than he was to his own nieces and nephews. He had 2 or 3 sisters, one of which lived in Newton, and I knew her, Lucy Lassoff. And Lucy had 2 sons, and there was a sister, Rosalie, and I think she had a daughter. There's a niece that lives in the area somewhere, and I don't know her last name. I could find it somewhere if I had to. But at any rate, he, by his own admission, he once said that he was closer to his wife's children than he was to his own blood nieces and nephews, if you want. And I don't know why. I don't know how that all happened. I think that, from my own experience, sisters tend to be closer than brothers.
Right.
And there are, at the time, there were 5, 7 nieces and nephews, none of which lived close other than my brother and myself. So we became the children that they didn't have. And over the years, I know that he looked upon us as such. At one point, I remember it being a very touchy point around my house, but he introduced us as his children to somebody. And my mother wasn't very happy about that whole thing. And I think that, looking back, I think that that's the way he felt. And I think that these were the people that we were all he had. He spent every holiday with us. I don't recall growing up there ever being a Jewish holiday or a secular holiday where they were not at our table. They were at our house at least once a week. They would come out. My aunt loved to cook, and you cook for one guy, it gets a little boring after a while. So she would come out, and everybody had favorite foods. And if it was your birthday, she would say, "What did you want?" And my aunt used to make a pineapple upside down cake. I remember that clearly. And they would come out for that. And they were very generous when times were tough for my folks financially. I know that there was money changing hands from my aunt. She, I think, she did the financial dealings at home so that she would have cash. And I think that she would, on her way out, slip my mother some money in times when things got a little bad. And very generous when we were bar mitzvah. I remember Elmer especially making sure that we were ready. That was one of the things that it was very important to him, that because he didn't have sons to have bar mitzvahs, so we were the next best thing. we were always coming down the pike. So,
Tell me about coming into this building when you were a kid. You said big?
I first of all, I remember the synagogue, this physical size was about the same size as the synagogue that we belonged to in Framingham. It has since moved on to become a big synagogue. But it was awe-inspiring because it was always quiet. There was no Hebrew school in those days, I don't think. So there weren't a lot of noise and tumult going on. But it seemed bigger. I think that the physical plant, the physical building, seemed larger than ours was, although if you measured ours was probably bigger. But it was almost mysterious. I remember, and I don't know why I can remember that, but I remember the first time I came in here, at least, I think it was the first time I came in, and seeing all of this and being literally thunderstruck because it is what it is. I mean, it's very impressive. And I belonged to a modern synagogue that had modern fittings. So that I had never seen the separation, did not know about that. Where I grew up, the bima was all in one. The rabbi stood on one side, the cantor stood on the other. The Torahs were behind you and so forth. This setup I'd never seen before. And I remember just being very struck by all of that. And as I said, I was probably 6 or 7 years old, if I can remember, if it was that far back, that it was very awe-inspiring. And again, it may have been winter because I remember it being very warm. Again, I'm sure the heat couldn't be regulated properly. But and Elmer came in with a great deal of reverence, but a casual reverence. And at that point, I realized this guy must be here more often than not, because he felt very comfortable and very, he was busy doing other things, turning on the lights, checking this. Then he went downstairs. I remember the bathrooms being terribly old. As I recall, it was a pull chain.
Right.
And I remember being mystified by that. I could not understand how that whole thing worked. But I remember coming in and just standing at the doorway there. And then he went on to the Amud and stood there. And he said, "Come up here." And I went up, and he told me about how, I don't think I had ever been to a service at that point. That's how young I was. And explained to me how it all happened. And the cantor would stand here, and the rabbi would be there. And, or if it was the same person, I don't remember. I don't remember the conversation. But I remember him taking me by the hand and showing me all around and so forth. And we went downstairs, and he showed me downstairs. We went into the kitchen. And I remember looking back, I remember the kitchen was pretty grim. It was gas jets. The earliest I have is this sense of awe, this sense of, wow, this is really something.
When you would come here for services, who was...
We rarely came. I think I was only here once or twice for services. And it would have been probably on a Sunday. I only remember there being a cantor. I remember someone chanting. I don't remember a rabbi as such. And of course, even then there was no English. It was Ashkenazic Hebrew, which was also a foreign sound. Now it's not so foreign because I'm aware of it, but it was and I remember it was coming from the center. And it was just very different than I was accustomed to. But again, stayed for a while. I think that Elmer sensed that I was kind of lost. And this was before, when we were older, and he would, after bar mitzvahs, when he would occasionally, I think there were probably people saying Kaddish, and they needed dominion, and they were coming here, and he would know in advance, and he would come get us. I don't recall my parents ever bringing us here. Elmer would come get us, bring us. Oftentimes we would have dinner at his house or something. and come here because he knew that he needed 10 people because somebody was saying cottage and wanted to say it here. This was in later years. But I don't recall there being more than one clergy in those days.
But the people, they were all men?
As I recall, I don't remember ever seeing anybody up there, and when I went up before, I don't remember ever being up there. I must have, at some point, gone up there. But I remember it existing, and because I was in a conservative synagogue in Framingham, this was, women sitting separately was not a big issue. But I remember my aunt complaining about that, because on the holidays it got hot up there, and she used to not go. She said, I'm not going to sit up there and sweat. You let me sit downstairs with everybody else, I'll be fine. But I think she used to go occasionally, just to satisfy him. But I don't remember there being women. And I remember, as I said, we came here to make a minyan. And in those days, women didn't count.
Right.
It didn't matter.
Were they all older men? Were they younger?
There were peers of his,
Okay.
which at that time seemed terribly old. And he was probably in his 40s. Elmer and Ethel were older than my parents by a few years, not terribly older, but he was older, and I think that he was probably his peers and older. I don't recall seeing any 20-year-old men here. They may have been, I just don't remember them. I don't recall faces or anything else, I just remember situations.
You had said before when we were talking that you would hold the ladder while he...
Yeah, when we were a little bit older, there was, as we have discussed, there was stenciling went around, and it was somewhere towards the top of the windows, but not at the ceiling.
Right.
And I remember the walls were stucco; they were not smooth,
Right.
and they were painted a peachy beige. And there was brown stenciling that somebody who knew what they were doing had done. And because the roof leaked, and the walls leaked, and the paint flaked, and it got old, it needed touch-up. And I remember him coming by on a Sunday and picking up my brother and me, and brought us out because he had to stand on a very tall ladder. And somebody had, all the way up to, well, at least at the top of the windows.
it was more than that. It was up near the ceiling.
Okay, and it was a very tall ladder, and he needed to somebody to hold the ladder, and we would literally stand here while he stood there with a little can, as I recall, of brown paint, and a paintbrush, an artist's brush, and he was touching up where the flaking had happened on the stenciling that went all the way around the room. It's one of the clearest memories I have of this building, is that stenciling. And when I came in, I said, the stenciling is gone, and we've talked about that, but. That's one of the earliest memories I have, the clearest memories. I don't know how, I must have been older, or what good would I have done to hold the ladder?
Right.
So I was probably in, past bar mitzvah, early teens. And other things come back to me. I remember helping him clear some of the shrubbery and things like that. He was cleaning outside, and he again needed another set of hands so that he could just get it cleaned up. So, and we were all he had. We were the ones that he could, you're coming with, there was none of this, gee, could you give me some help here? Can I come? He would show up and say, get in the car. And because he was a special uncle, I mean, I think because he doted on us and his wife more so, that it was one of those, it was almost an honor. It was almost one of these things. I remember when we were little, my brother and I used to fight to sit in the front seat with him in his car. Because we would be probably coming here, or going to his house. So it was one of these held in esteem, and it was very important to us. He wanted us to help. We never said, gee, I want to stay here and play with my friends. Of course, Uncle Elmer wants us to. I don't remember us ever calling him Uncle. That's the other thing I was trying to think of. I think we always called him Elmer, by his first name only. I think we introduced him to somebody as my uncle, but we always, because fragmented to all of that. His wife's name was Ethel. And when my brother and I were very young, my brother and I are very close in age, we could not say Ethel. Ethel came out Apple. And it stuck till the day she died. And it was always Elmer and Apple and Elmer. That's the way, cards were written to that. And so I don't think we ever called him Uncle Elmer. I think my kids my kids really didn't know him. He died when they were too young. But we always just called him Elmer.
Apple and Elmer.
Apple and Elmer. Yeah.
What do you suppose was his motivation for being so involved in the synagogue?
As I was told by him, first of all, his father was, I think, one of the founding fathers of the synagogue. So he was raised here. This is where he went. I don't know where he lived as a child. It was in Newton. It was around here somewhere. So it was part of his upbringing. His father, I think, was very involved with the day-to-day operations of the synagogue. So he was kind of brought into that. As the years went on, I think as Elmer was having, needed things to do, I'm not sure, I never understood Elmer's employment. As near as I can trace back, Elmer worked until 1954. And then he started doing other things. And I don't know what. He had a real estate license, he had other things, but I think he had a lot of time. And he told me, when I was older and could understand, that on his father's deathbed, his father said, whatever you do, take care of the show. Elmer knew how to fix plumbing, he knew how to fix wiring. Whether or not it was right, I don't know, but he knew how to, and he could patch it together, I guess. I remember him having a cloth satchel of plumber's tools, which is the plumbers used to carry their stuff in. And it was always in the trunk of his car. And he said to me something to the effect of, I promised my father that I would always take care of the show. He was living out a promise, and it was a real dedication, and never doubted it. All the mail, everything went to his house. All the bills came to his house. He sent out the bills. I mean, I think he was really a one-man show.
Yeah.
He really was.
What did his father do for a living? Do you have
I
any
have
idea?
absolutely no idea. I think his father may have been, I think his father was handy. I think his father owned a lot of property. I know that there was a lot of real estate in that family from whence he derived an income. And slowly over the years, the property was sold off. There was none of them left anymore, so it must have been sold to somebody. But I have a feeling that he was sort of this landlord kind of a person and a superintendent, and he did kind of all of that stuff, and Elmer did the same thing. He only had one brother who was, I don't know, older, I don't remember. He had a brother, Joe, as I recall, who moved to California. So Elmer was really the only one left. The sister two sisters, I think, lived in New York, and the youngest sister lived in Newton.
Lucy.
Lucy. Is she still alive?
I don't think so. The last time I saw her...
She would be terribly old.
She would be 100 years old, I think. Last time I saw her, she was very badly crippled. She had curvature of the spine. She couldn't straighten up at all.
Oh.
She was literally like this. So
I remember her very clearly. She had this is a complete divergence, but she had a beach house in Nantasket.
Yep. That was how I got to know her.
That was one of the treats, is that we would go down there for the day.
Right.
I remember staying overnight, and Elmer and Ethel would take us down there, and we'd spend the night. She had children our age, although I don't recall ever meeting them. Why they weren't there, I don't know. Maybe they may have been a bit older, but I don't remember her sons at all. I just remember her. I think I met one of them when Elmer passed away, but I have absolutely no recollection of Elmer's family. Mentions of his sister. He had a sister named Rosalie and Lucy. I think there was another sister, and his brother Joe, who was younger. I think he was the youngest, and he had moved to California, and that was the end of that. In those days, you moved to California, you might as well fall off the planet. But as I said, so he, not having family other than his sister Lucy, who he was very close to, but not so much her children, put us in the limelight. My brother and I were it.
Did you feel privileged to be helping him? Did you feel, oh, this is a pain in the neck, I wish he didn't ask me? How did you feel about it?
When we were younger, probably preteens, it was certainly privileged. He never had to ask. He would show up and say, I need you to come with me. I want the coat, and we left. And whatever we did was, we were working with Elmer, and that was one of those privileged things to do. When we got to be teenagers, it probably was a nuisance, but I think we still felt that, we were still at that point very close to him and my aunt, and it was one of those, if Dad asked you to do something, you do it. So if Elmer asked you, you do it too. My father never said no. They can't do that. I need them for something else or anything else. My father was very good about sharing. I think my father understood that they had no children, and this was as close to children as they were going to get. So, yeah, I think when he asked us when we were a little bit younger, and this was a great adventure. I mean, this was, first of all, you got to ride in Elmer's car, which he always had big cars. He liked big cars. You got to ride in the big car, and then in those days, we could both sit in the front seat because Ethel wasn't with him. And we'd come here, and this was a dedicated time. This was time that, it wasn't spent when he was talking to my parents. It wasn't grown-up time at all. It was just us being with Elmer. And we did feel privileged. Yeah.
Did you feel a sense of attachment to the building, or was it more that you were attached to Elmer?
The second. We were more attached to him. Because it wasn't an every week thing. It probably wasn't an every month thing. It was every once in a while. And so the attachment was coming here with him. I vaguely remember the back of my mind somewhere. I know that he used to make breakfast here for whoever, I don't know what, it must have been a weekday. It couldn't have been Shabbos because they couldn't cook on Shabbos.
No, it was Shabbos.
It must have been, he did a breakfast here, and I remember downstairs, and I remember him making eggs, lox, and onions, which I don't like to this day, but that's neither here nor there. But I remember him preparing breakfast for whoever was here, and there must have been enough people. And he did it single-handedly. Again, it's one of those little fragments that floats in and out when I think about it. When I went downstairs, I remembered clearly that, yeah.
Do you think that your involvement with your synagogue in Framingham is in some way influenced by the time that you spent here and the impact that it had on you to see his devotion to this place? Do you think that influenced how you're living your own life?
Had to have, because my parents, in the house I grew up in, was, for more or less, for the simplest terms, were 3-day Jews. My parents always belonged to a synagogue until I was well into college. And so we were not that involved growing up. It had to have planted a seed somewhere. In later years, we became very involved with the synagogue in Natick, where I happen to be president right now. And I think part of it, the Temple Israel of Natick. And I think that had to have had some bearing on it. I'm sure that it planted a seed somewhere that sooner or later it came to fruition. I remember when I was installed as president, I was sitting there thinking about all of the family members that had come before me. And certainly I said, Jesus, I wish Elmer were here to see this. I wish my father were here to see this. But, yeah, it had to.
Do you think that your children will have that kind of attachment to a synagogue? Doesn't have to be this one, but that they have had any of that rubbed off on them?
Oh, I think so. I think so. When my son got married a little more than a year ago. Thank you. As somebody said, they asked, one of my friends asked, are they being married by a rabbi? And I looked at him and I said, absolutely. He says, that's enough. She's breathing and you found a rabbi to marry her, that's fine. When he was, before the wedding, we had planned an ufruf. Or we asked him about having an ufruf. He was married in Maryland. His wife is from Maryland. The wedding was in Maryland. And I said, I assumed that it would probably, they would have an Ufruf in Maryland, which would make sense. And he said to me, oh no. He said, my Ufruf is in my show. And her family schlepped here for the Ufruf. And they are really very secular. But I think we had to explain to them what an Ufruf was. But hearing that, my Machatanim said, well, we're coming. I was floored that her parents and her grandparents, grandfather and his wife, and her uncle and his wife schlepped from Maryland. And it's not an easy, when you're not shul goers anyway. I mean, if my son would be, if the Ufruf was in Maryland, we certainly would have gone, and a few of our family members would have made the trip too. I didn't expect it of them. He insisted that it be there. So I looked at the rabbi at the time, and he said to me, well, you did something right. He is now, ironically, looking at real estate. And one of the houses that he's looking at in Maryland, he told me when he sent me a note, he called me, that they were looking at a house. He wanted me to see the specs on it online. And he said, and it's a block and a half from a conservative synagogue. He found it important to let me know that he knew where the nearest shul was, and it is literally around the corner. Yeah, I think so. I think that in my son's case, my daughter lives in San Francisco, and she's tried a few times. She's single. She works as a consultant. She actually works in either New Jersey or Virginia and commutes on weekends. Yes, she flies back and forth every weekend. So she's found it hard. Although she did, for one of the synagogues near her, had pairings for, it must have been Passover, and Rosh Hashanah when she couldn't get home. And they paired her with a young family, and she went there, and they were modern Orthodox, which she is not used to. But she figured, well, I'm here. So she went, she brought some wine.